Good evening, everyone. Happy Friday. I am very happy to welcome you all here, the ones who are live on the webinar and the ones who are going to watch later. This is my fourth or fifth relationship skills webinar, and today I want to talk to you about desire and maintaining the sexual spark in your relationship, because everyone wants more fun and excitement in their relationship. And I'm going to start with already putting the presentation that I've prepared on the screen. However, if you have any questions during the whole meeting today, the webinar, please either raise your hand on the chat line or simply unmute yourself and interrupt. It's totally fine with me. I will, of course, make some time for questions at the end. So let's go straight into it. So today I want to welcome you once again to Happy Ever After, to this relationship skills webinar. I'm making it a series that will become, that has become already regular, and I'm posting all these videos after the recording on my Facebook group, Find Your Own True Love. Because it's important for me that I make these seminars or webinars available to women in my community who need help in their relationships, because that's what I'm passionate about. Okay, so let's see if this works. Maybe it doesn't. Today, I really want to talk about desire, because in the last few weeks when I did webinars about relationships and intimacy, a lot of questions have come up about how do we move from just communicating and how we talk to our partners and how we create that connection with them at an intellectual level. How do we actually bring up some of the physical desire, the physical intimacy that sometimes it goes missing after you've been with someone for a long period of time. So today I want to talk a little bit about that. I myself have been in a relationship for 19 years. So I've experienced all the different stages, and I've been doing a lot of research in how to actually create this connection and how to stay happy and engage with each other for a long period of time. So I want to share some of that with you today. So first of all, just a quick overview of what I'm going to touch on today. So first of all, the importance of desire. Why can't we take it for granted? Why is it that we can't rely on the fact that desire will be there for the entire length of our relationship if we're still in love with a partner? So I'm going to explain a little bit the difference between sexual desire, chemistry, and the whole concept of attachment that happens in a long-term relationship, and what is actually happening at the physical level, biologically speaking, so that we understand a little bit more about why we all go through exactly the same process, and it actually takes work and intention and skills to maintain this desire. So we can't really take it for granted. Although we have it as a biological response, we also have to work on it. The second part is really to talk a little bit about some of the aspects that lead to this lack of desire, to this lack of connection and intimacy that we're feeling in long-term relationships, and what we can do about it, and if there's anything that we can learn from understanding what these barriers are. Then I'm going to talk about the whole conflict that we have in a relationship, where we enter a phase of a relationship called the power struggle, where we feel a loss of identity. We're not really quite sure of who we are, and that tension between who I am as a person and who I am as part of this relationship becomes a real difficulty for a lot of people. And there's always some sort of power struggle at some point in a relationship. I'm going to talk more about that. And then I'm going to talk about the specific aspects that I want to share today, which is how do I see the secret of maintaining an exciting and long-lasting level of intimacy and physical, intellectual, emotional, and physical intimacy with your partner. And if at any point you have questions, like I said, I'm very, very happy to respond to them. So let's keep going. First of all, I think we make a lot of assumptions when it comes to love. There are many, many reasons why we make those assumptions and why we tend to idealize love, and we think that we can take it for granted. That is something that is somehow our God-given right. But very often we tend to associate love with what I call chemistry, with sexual attraction. And I see this with a lot of the couples that I work with, because they come and say, oh, you know, I miss those days when I felt such attraction to my partner. You know, the spark was so powerful. We had such intimacy, such high levels of intimacy, and I miss that. And I think that is love. So because we associate chemistry with love, actually there are three different stages in love. So I'm going to talk a little bit about them, and how this misconception that love equals chemistry is actually causing us a lot of problems in this space. Don't know, I forgot to turn my WhatsApp off, so whatever. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the fact that chemistry, what we see in Disney movies as that kind of, you know, magic dust in the air and birds singing and all that stuff, is actually the easy part. It's very easy because we're biologically programmed to be attracted to other people, because ultimately our biological reason, our purpose for being on this planet is to procreate. So Mother Nature has made this extremely easy for us to fall in love with people, which means to be attracted to people enough so that we want to procreate with them. You know, there's a huge part of our biological systems and the reason we exist on this planet that is related to our desire to mate. Of course, we have added to this natural desire a whole bunch of different things that we normally call compatibility. And I'm not going to talk so much about the need for safety, because I talked about that in many other workshops before, but I just want to talk a little bit about why I actually believe that love is a drug. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by this statement. So scientifically, there's been a lot of studies that have tried to really understand the essence of love. What does it actually mean when we're in love with someone? Is there a difference between loving someone and being in love? And how do people feel? What is the actual biochemistry of our bodies when we are in love versus loving someone? So what they found in these studies is that actually the hormones that are associated with the feelings of being in love act on the same parts of the brain and in the same way as cocaine and heroin. So essentially, when we are in love, in those first stages of love, when we are very highly attracted to someone and we're really into someone, and, you know, we all remember a time in our life, at least, when we felt really, really interested in someone. Well, we're actually on drugs. And then we know that we want more and more of that person. We want to spend all our waking moments with them and all that. And then after that, after a while, it all goes down. So I'll explain a little bit about what this means biologically speaking, because I find that for me, it's very useful to know how my body feels, but understand the science behind that. Why am I exactly experiencing whatever is happening for me at the moment? So the first phase of love is this high chemistry, high attraction phase, which is called lust. Because I mentioned that chemistry is our natural desire to mate, it means that when we first see a partner that feels like a potential good genetic match for us to have a baby with them, our brain and our body starts producing the sexual hormones, which are testosterone and estrogen. And the combination of these two sexual hormones, which exist in both men and women. Of course, there's more testosterone in the male body and there's more estrogen in the female body, but actually even the presence of testosterone in the female body impacts our level of desire, sexual desire. So when we experience high chemistry for someone, we are in this phase of a relationship, which is lust, where we simply focus on this biological imperative. I want to meet this person and I want to mate with them. But then once we start spending some time with this person, once we satisfy this desire for them, and the closer we get to them, the more we engage in sexual activity with people that we're very, very attracted to, we then enter a second phase of our relationship where the whole experience becomes more mental. So yes, we still have the physical attraction, our body still produces testosterone and estrogen, but the more time we spend with them and the more we create an emotional and intellectual connection with this person, basically fireworks start, blowing up in our heads because a new bunch of hormones is actually being produced. And those hormones are dopamine, which is the pleasure hormone, which is exactly the hormone that is produced when we take drugs like heroin and cocaine. Not that I know, I've never taken them, but I've been in love many, many times. So I know how it feels when we get pleasure. We get that hit of, you see someone you like, or the smile that you have on your face when you receive a text message from a person that you're in love with is literally that hit of dopamine. Adrenaline, or also called norepinephrine, is that feeling of excitement that we feel. It is our brain experiencing this fight or flight, the need for survival, and somehow we attach this need for survival and the excitement that comes with it to this person that we see. And serotonin, which is also what I call the obsession hormone, which makes us feel attached to this person. So when lust and attraction are combined and we experience a high level of testosterone, estrogen, dopamine, adrenaline, and serotonin, and this cocktail of drugs is actually what sustains our love, being in love, for a certain period. However, it's been proven scientifically that this phase can last mostly at best, if we're really, really lucky, about 24 months, because biologically speaking, that's about how long it takes for a couple to actually procreate and raise the baby to a certain level. But after this phase, after we get into, let's say, a committed relationship with a person, a lot of biological and hormonal changes start to happen in our body, because suddenly we have safety, we have connection, we have all this idea that everything is now, we're no longer running. We no longer need the adrenaline because we're sure that someone wants us, So once the commitment stage is reached, and once we get to the point of exclusivity, let's say, we then move into a different phase, which is the phase of attachment. So the more time we spend with this person, we actually shift from producing high levels of testosterone and estrogen and dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline into a more settled phase of the relationship, where we become friends, where things kind of feel normal and we don't have to chase that high. And here we have two very, very important players in terms of hormones that are creating this attachment. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone, the hormone that actually creates motherly love, that is produced in a female body mostly when she's breastfeeding. So once a woman gives birth, she produces a huge amount of oxytocin to create that connection with the baby, so that we're biologically bound to that baby, and therefore we're going to take care of it and make sure that he or she will survive. The sad truth in life is that unfortunately a male body doesn't produce as much oxytocin, which is why men are so much more detached in terms of their definition of sex. Sex can be sex just for the sake of sex, whereas for women, because of the bonding hormone that we produce every time we have sex with a partner, it becomes love. So not only biologically we become bonded to our partner, but also culturally we've been told that sex outside of a loving relationship isn't satisfying, it doesn't work, it doesn't feel good. Actually, lots of people have proven that that isn't the case, that it's a mindset that we have, but it gives us the safety of being in a relationship that is connected. I have people texting me right now. Anyway, so I'm now moving to the second part, which is talking about the enemies of connection and keeping the desire apart. And I talk a lot and I work a lot with infidelity and issues where people feel cheated. But beyond the obvious fact of cheating, when someone chooses another partner because their needs are not met or because they want to discover different parts of themselves, actually there's a lot of other reasons that people can feel betrayal in a relationship that obviously impact their ability to connect with their partner. And according to Esther Perel, who is my guru in terms of relationship coaching and therapy, those enemies, those barriers that we put in the way of our continuous connection and building this attachment, but also keep some of the attraction, are things like indifference. Once we check out of the relationship, why we feel emotionally neglected because our partner isn't prioritizing us, is not paying attention to us, doesn't value us, feels contempt for us, which is that feeling of, you're not worth anything to me, you don't mean anything. Lack of respect, refusal of intimacy, rejection. All of these fears are attachment fears, are rejection and abandonment, and the fear of actually being trapped and being suffocated in the relationship. They all play a part in creating this lack of connection and in breaking apart the bonds of attachment that are created naturally. So once we are in this phase, even last night I had a session with a couple who've been together for 18 years, and they've come to the point where maybe they don't know if there's a way back. In order to regain that spark, in order to rediscover that connection, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to actually understand about the human body, about relationships. So I'm going to move into talking a little bit about that. What tends to happen after this high attraction phase in a relationship, after the romance phase, the 2 years, let's say, when we feel very, very attracted to our partner, we tend to go into a phase of a relationship called a power struggle. A power struggle, or how I put it here, we versus me, is the part in our life in a couple where we understand that actually in the beginning, as we're trying to create this bond, as you're trying to get to know each other, and as we're trying to create that safety and the feeling of belonging that is part and parcel of being in a committed relationship, we tend to lose a part of ourselves. We tend to so we choose to merge ourselves with our partner. We choose to become one because that's kind of what has been sold to us, the story that when you meet the love of your life is your other half, right? So you bring these two universes together, and then a part of you naturally becomes diluted and becomes lost. But once all these hormones kind of ease off a little bit, and you're starting to notice that you've forgotten who you are, that you don't do the things that you used to do, that you no longer have your own friends, but you only have our friends, that everything that you do is about the kids or is about the common life, and you feel responsible for the other partner's happiness, even though they are not taking responsibility, a lot of really difficult things are happening on the level of intimacy and connection. So, you can't exactly have a powerful sexual connection if you're feeling that you're at war with the other person and that you're trying to reestablish your sense of identity. Because as Esther Perel says, in a balanced relationship, there is always a tension. There is always the need for connection, for unification. We want to have things in common. We want to look for those things that make us compatible with each other. But at the same time, the biggest killer of desire is too much intimacy in some ways, because the more you know about your partner, the less there is to discover. So in this phase of power struggle, in the we versus me, that is the time when you can actually create that tension and maintain that tension by maintaining the sense of identity that Esther Perel calls otherness, which is always going to be the attractive part in your partner. You're always going to feel that there's a little bit of mystery, because mystery supports and creates desire. But most of the time in committed relationships, not only we forget about mystery because we've merged our worlds too closely, and we've shared everything that we are willing to share, even though of course there's parts of us that we never want to share with our partner. But on top of that, you have the catastrophe of kids, which absolutely change the sexual dynamic in a couple. And then it's very, very hard to come back from that feeling of rejection and abandonment that happens when a child comes onto the plane. So many people say that in their relationship, they associate the lack of intimacy with this feeling of losing themselves, don't know who I am anymore. And that is a really important aspect that you need to recreate if you want to get the spark back. In order for you to find your partner attractive, you need to see them with different eyes. You need to look at them from a different angle. Like, look at how other women are looking at your husband. Because, look what happens to even the best couples in the world. Brad Pitt and Angelina, of course, they're like two of the sexiest, hottest people on the planet, and still after a while you just look at him, and for other people it's like, oh my god, he's Brad Pitt, he's one of the hottest men alive. And Angelina's like, yeah, he's just Brad, my husband. A lot of the women I work with tell me, my husband is actually very, very attractive, but I feel nothing for him. I look at him and I think, yeah, he's just my husband. So that is something that we have to work on. And it's a mindset thing. The moment we go into the power struggle phase, we also call this phase taking each other for granted, because we do start to take things for granted. We do start to assume that certain things will always be there, and we don't really make an effort anymore. So what I'm going to talk about now is really this idea of what can we do to end up, in a happy relationship with a very healthy, very balanced sex life in our 60s and 70s. And if this is who you want to be, you may at this point in time in your relationship think, that is never possible for me. We've lost that spark so long ago. There's no way that my husband and I could ever get to the point where we can be naughty under the covers and actually enjoy that experience. But from personal experience and from working with many, many couples who have been there, sometimes not having sex for 10 years, other couples I know, for 5-6 years only have sex like 3 times a year or something like that. It's really interesting for me to know that for me, sex is the relationship glue. If you want more intimacy, it's a bit of a catch-22. You want more intimacy to have more sex, and then you want to have more sex to create more intimacy. So it's a bit of a paradox when it comes to that. But the reality of our body, our physiological response to sexual arousal is that if you don't use it, you lose it. So it means that if we're never engaging in sexual thoughts, we never engage in actual physical activity with our partner, our body at some point decides that we don't need it. So it's going to redirect all that energy into something else. And that means that we never feel arousal. We never feel sexual excitement. So in the next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of desire. But first, I'm going to talk about a few of the misconceptions that I've noticed about what it takes to have a great sex life. So many people make assumptions about what a great sex life would need to include. And what has been, again, scientifically proven is that actually none of the assumptions that we make in this space are literally true. The first assumption is that people who have great sex lives have sex very, very frequently. They're like always having sex. Well, high frequency is definitely a characteristics of the phase of lust that I mentioned earlier. In high chemistry couples, indeed, they have sex maybe more frequently, but the reality is everyone who's been in a relationship with someone for more than a year doesn't have sex as often as anybody assumes. And there is no normal. A lot of people ask me, what is normal? What should we have sex 3 times a week, 7 times a week, twice a month, whatever it is? Well, the reality is that most couples are not at the same level in terms of hormone, like their desire level or their libido level. There's always usually a partner who wants and needs more sex and another who is like a lot less interested in that. And that causes the vast majority of problems, of intimacy problems in couples, because there is always an imbalance. But what I'm going to talk about later today is the best way to fix that imbalance. Because realistically, if you're sitting around waiting for that perfect moment when both you and your husband are going to be equally interested, equally ready, equally aroused in that moment, that's never going to happen. If that's what the goal, the holy grail is of sex in a committed relationship, it's never going to happen. And this is how you end up not having sex for 10 years. So this is definitely a misconception. The frequency of how much sex you have is not a good indicator of how satisfying your sex life is. The second misconception is that somehow you need to have crazy sex, swinging from the chandeliers, trying kink, exploring threesomes or open relationships. Absolutely not, actually. People who have a healthy, sustained sexual connection actually find the middle ground, and it's the best indicator for satisfaction in this term, it's actually not how crazy they go or how many fantasies they explore, but actually how much they cuddle after sex, you know, how much physical contact they have to expand the level of adrenaline after climax. So no, to have a great sex life, you don't have to have a crazy sex life. And if you don't feel like you want to explore more out there ideas, vanilla sex can be vanilla sex is sex that is quite normal and doesn't have any crazy adventures included, is perfectly fine. And many couples who are in happy long-term relationships just, you know, enjoy normal sex. And the third misconception is that somehow people who have a great sex life are the ones who constantly can't take their eyes off each other and can't wait to get home and rip each other's clothes off. Again, that doesn't really happen in long-term relationships. That is, once again, a misconception that is created by our vision, what we see on TV, that happy ever after, you know, kind of ends on your wedding day. But what actually really happens in a relationship is after the wedding day, when you settle into the, you know, the reality versus the fantasy that you have created of each other before you get into a relationship. So once again, satisfying sex life is one in which you find your own rhythm, that you and your partner negotiate agreements, either explicitly or implicitly, in which you find that balance, whatever works for you as a couple. And also, it needs to be said that our libido, our sexual desire, is never the same. It's, you know, it varies on a, not only on a daily basis, but even between times of day. Some people love morning sex, other people prefer evening sex. Well, if you and your partner are on these two ends of the spectrum, negotiation and explicit agreement needs to be made. And once again, when I'm talking a little bit later about the solutions to understanding desire, I'm going to make some points about this. So now let's look at what I call the 2 secrets of going the distance. So it's really a matter of intention. And I always say to couples who come to me with doubts of whether their relationship can ever be repaired, or if it's possible for them to maintain the connection, I always say that the magic ingredient in the success of a relationship is for you to decide you need to work on it. Putting that intention out there, not giving up, making that commitment to do whatever is necessary to recreate a new relationship. Even if your old relationship or whatever you thought was the ideal relationship is no longer there because you've grown, you've moved on, you've learned different things, there is still an opportunity for you to create a new connection, to literally design your tailor-made solution for a relationship. So what do people do? The people who are successful at maintaining a balanced, healthy sex life, these 2 secrets are really important for me. So the first ingredient is actually knowing that your partner has your back. No matter what, you have a friendship. So beyond the sexual attraction, beyond the hormones, beyond the fact that they're a great lover or not, there is this feeling that you can depend on your partner, that they're there for you no matter what. And I'm not saying in person, like literally, I'm talking about physical presence, but I'm talking about emotional availability, being able to have empathy for your partner and connecting with them and being able to be vulnerable. In my last workshop on intimacy, I was talking about how vulnerability is really the key to creating intimacy. And, you know, to have trust, sexual desire depends 100% of knowing that you can reveal the darkest secret, so to speak, or you can allow yourself to experience pleasure in front of your partner and not feel judged, not feel criticized, not feel like you're not good enough. And if you have this dependability, and if you have the ability to discuss how you feel in those moments, what are you insecure about? Well, of course, we all have insecurities about sex. Maybe we don't have a lot of experience. Maybe we feel insecure about our bodies. Maybe, you know, once you've given birth to your child, your breasts do not feel the same for a long time. So what used to work before pregnancy is no longer the way. Like our entire sexual organs, you know, the entire reproductive system tends to change after maternity. So it's this process of rediscovering that needs to happen. But for that to be possible, you need to always know that your partner is there for you regardless what happens, and that you can express yourself. You can say, this doesn't work in the same way and I need it to be different. So if you have this, this is a great ingredient to look for. The second thing that couples who are successful in this space always do, this is proven scientifically, is these people choose to prioritize sex, choose to make space for sex in their life. Because the truth is, you know, it's one of those things where, yes, we need it, but it's not like food. You know, we can't go without food because our body literally gives up. However, with sex, although it is a basic instinct, so to speak, it's something that we can shut down and we can find different ways of satisfying those needs. But people who are successful at this are definitely the ones who choose not to sit in front of the TV watching mindlessly and kind of emptying their brain, whoever wants to empty their brain, I don't know, but, or watching stupid shows like, I don't know, Tiger King and stuff like that. But they actually choose to go into the bedroom and make time for each other and actually experience this together. So it is a choice that we make. Even when we don't choose sex, we still make a choice. We choose to prioritize our children. We choose to prioritize our work. We choose to prioritize everything else but sex. And very often I'm hearing this from couples that I work with that say, you know, yes, the kids have really impacted our life as a couple, but I also feel that the kids have become like a reason why we can avoid creating intimacy, and it's almost an excuse to avoid sex because it's scary, because suddenly I don't feel the connection with you. We haven't worked on our connection as lovers. We haven't created what I call the love bubble, the couples bubble, this sacred space in which intimacy and arousal and excitement and sexy time can happen. So when we don't make time for sex, we obviously don't have this opportunity to do it. So now I'm going to start talking about desire and some of the solutions that I've been talking about. And I'd like to first start by saying that we've been misled, that what we're hearing desire to be. Can you please mute yourself, whoever is not muted? I'm hearing some noises. Thank you. So we are taught to believe, you know, we are shown on TV and all these places that desire is like a lightning bolt, that it just happens and suddenly you just feel the need to have sex with a partner. And that is to some extent true in the lust and attraction phases of a relationship, because that's how body reacts. It's the anticipation of pleasure. It's this idea that, oh my God, I'm seeing someone who I'm really attracted to and I'm going to want to have sex with them. So this attitude or this mindset that desire is something that just happens to us, it's instantaneous, it just comes, and we're sitting around waiting for that lightning bolt moment to happen for both of us at the same time. That's exactly why we're losing the sexual spark, because once you're out of the lust phase, this doesn't tend to happen all the time. Of course, in the beginning of a relationship, when you're in this super high level of testosterone and estrogen, just seeing your partner's, you know, your new lover's name on your phone can trigger a burst of desire. Or seeing them in person on your second, third, fifth, 10th date, whatever it is, after you haven't seen them for a long time, suddenly you feel this desire. But in the long-term relationship, that doesn't tend to happen. And I'm going to talk about this concept that there are two types of desire. There is this spontaneous desire that I've mentioned, which is also highly associated with the way the male body experiences desire. You know, they say that men think about sex every 6 seconds or something like that. And they not only think about sex,
What's that,
they experience the desire.
Kaiwan, please.
So, Meru, I think your microphone is on.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm going to mute you. but not myself. Okay. So the idea that there is a second, a different type of desire that maybe we're not so aware of or we're not really taught to experience is the idea of responsive desire. So the difference in spontaneous versus responsive desire is that spontaneous desire is all about the anticipation of pleasure. So you think you see someone that you're attracted to, you instantly start thinking about wanting to have sex with them, and you start feeling, you essentially your brain and your body starts producing testosterone and estrogen, and you start feeling aroused by that person. Responsive desire is the opposite of that. Responsive desire happens in response to pleasure. So there are a couple of sex researchers out there that I like to explore the work of. And one of them has this really interesting analogy for how to think of the difference between spontaneous and responsive desire. Obviously, we all know what spontaneous desire is, but think about imagining that a friend invites you to a party next weekend. And you like partying, you enjoy being around people and everything is good, and you say yes, okay, fine. But then you think, oh God, I have to find a babysitter, and then I have to kind of dig out my heels I haven't worn in ages because my shoes have forgotten what it feels like to walk in the street with this social isolation. And then I have to put on clothes, and then I have to drive to the party or make sure that the kids are in bed before then. So it just feels like a drag. And you're even thinking, oh, maybe, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. But then if you do make the effort, if you do dress up, if you do find a babysitter and you go to the party, when you're there, it actually feels really good and you're having a good time. And you may be thinking to yourself when you're going home, I'm so glad I eventually decided to drag myself out of the house and do this, because it's nice to connect with people. It's nice to feel like, I'm included in a community. Well, responsive desire in sexual terms is exactly like that. If you kind of allow yourself to put yourself in an erotic context, if you allow yourself to touch your partner's skin, so to experience some pleasure, if you cuddle, if you hold hands on the sofa, if you ask your partner to give you a foot rub or a back massage or whatever, it actually it reminds you that sex and connection and physical connection feels really good. So it's this idea of creating the opportunity, saying yes to the idea that there's a party. So saying yes to sex, even if it is something that you don't feel like right now, but creating the anticipation for that desire to build up, for you to respond to pleasure in a way that awakens your body to the sensation of being desired and of being wanted. That is really paramount to shifting the way we think about sex and to recreate this spark. So for me, in summary, is really to move from the idea that sexual desire can only be created like this, as a spark, like your husband gives you the look or the touch. We all know what that is. And suddenly you feel like, I don't really want to do that. But actually, if you plan it ahead, if you know that, let's say, every Sunday afternoon when the kids are out playing, you have, it's sexy time, and you create a ritual around it, and you rediscover each other, and you give each other, it doesn't have, sex doesn't have to be penetration. Being engaged in sexual activity can mean just cuddling, just kissing, just holding each other. So here are some examples, or, it's kind of a checklist of what is the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire. So obviously, spontaneous desire just pops up out of the blue, like I said, whereas responsive desire requires an erotic context, requires maybe to have this ritual, like I mentioned, knowing that Saturday afternoon is sexy time, or that you start building that anticipation by talking to your partner and saying, okay, Friday night is date night, and date night could also come with some sexy time associated. Again, you decide what that is. Both these types of desire are absolutely normal and absolutely healthy. And I'm going to give you some statistics in a bit about what is the difference between them and what percentage of the population experiences primarily one or the other, and how many people are in the middle. Of course, culturally, we've been told that desire is spontaneous or has to happen spontaneously. And if that doesn't happen, then it means that you don't love your partner and that it's never going to work again. Of course, once you start to think about responsive desire as an alternative to that, and you put yourself in that mood and you create the opportunity for that party to happen, things can work very differently. And yeah, because part of the way we look at sex and desire has actually been modeled on pretty much the male libido, or like the male response to sex, going all the way back to Masters and Johnson's in 1960s, where they took the male arousal response as the norm, so to speak, completely ignoring the fact that female response is completely different. So that's why maybe culturally we have been programmed to believe that unless you're responding like this, you're just not interested in sex. That is absolutely not true. And in fact, the vast majority of couples that I work with, it's usually the women who feel they are not getting enough sex, that they're not satisfied with their sex life, because yeah, they may get sex, but they don't get the intimacy and they don't get the connection. So going back to frequency now, yeah, spontaneous desire in the beginning of a relationship, of course, you're going to have more frequent desire for sex. Is normal because our bodies are flooded with testosterone and estrogen. And this is the biological imperative of mating. The more sex we have with a partner, the more likely we are to get pregnant and to actually, have a baby. But once you are in a committed relationship and things have been going on for a while, this biological imperative kind of decreases, because you may already have 2, 3 children. So Mother Nature kind of gives us a break sometimes. And we no longer are so desperate for sex all the time for procreation reasons, but we still enjoy sex. We are pretty much one of the 3 or 4 animals on this planet who has sex for fun. Most other species have sex for procreation only, but we are actually able to enjoy sex for fun. So in order for responsive desire to function and to appear, we need to create the space. We need to hold space, this erotic context that needs intention, and it needs to be prioritized. Like I said, it's a choice that we need to make. Depending on which end of the spectrum you are, spontaneous desire can feel like too much. So if you're in a situation where you have mismatched libidos, or you respond to desire differently, your husband may be more spontaneous and you may be more in the responsive camp, then this imbalance can create a feeling like, oh, you always push me for sex when I don't want it, your timing sucks. Whereas for him, if you're primarily in the responsive desire camp, it may feel that you are not interested in sex, which is absolutely not true. But because the conditions are not there to create the responsive desire space, then you are not experiencing desire in the same way that you do. So there's a disconnect and also an opportunity for realignment. So I promised that I would give you some facts, some research. So there's been a lot of research into this, and I can actually share with you the sources if you want. But essentially, 30% of women are more or less exclusively responsive, which means that in long-term relationship, they very rarely experience spontaneous desire. But interestingly enough, only 5% of men, because this is in the nature of the male sexual response, as I said. So men tend to be more into spontaneous desire. But like I said, I know many cases of couples in which the husband is the low libido partner. The male partner experiences less spontaneous desire, like these 5% in this box here. And then on the other side, 75% of men and approximately 15% of women in this kind of statistical study that they did are more or less exclusively spontaneous. So maybe this is some new vocabulary for you to consider. If you think about it, what are the circumstances in which you experience desire? And if you haven't experienced desire for a long time, and obviously there's a few things that we need to discuss in a minute, but when you did experience desire, or on the odd occasions that the thought of sex comes up in your mind, is it spontaneous? Is it brought on by external factors, or is it because you are responding to something that is happening? And to summarize this whole thing, it's essentially a essentially a quarter of men and more than 80% of women in the world do not experience a spontaneous desire as their basic response, which means that a lot more people need to plan sex and they need to make the choice to prioritize sex in their life. And for some reason, it's usually the last thing that we choose to prioritize. And all of these different things that I talked about contribute to that. But actually, you may think, oh, I'm definitely in the court where my husband is in responsive in spontaneous desire camp and I'm more in responsive desire camp. So how are we ever going to match? How are we ever going to meet in the middle? This is actually a big opportunity. It is a blessing, because by having this tension, it gives you an opportunity for both of you to encourage each other and to build space for each of you to get more of what they want. But in order for this to happen, you need communication. You need to understand more about your own sexuality, your erotic blueprint, like a fellow sex coach calls it. There are different ways in which we respond to sexual activity, and the understanding that we respond to sexual stimuli differently is a great gap of knowledge that you can start exploring with your partner. And this is one of the things that I do in my couples work, by helping the two partners explore this area and what is the gap and what is the distance between them. So when partners feel that there's this distance, I sometimes ask them to stand up and literally move away from each other, at physically speaking, to show the kind of distance that they feel safe at. And sometimes it's, I don't know, 10 feet. Sometimes there is so much distance, emotional distance and mental distance that we create between ourselves and the partner that we love dearly. That is all of those enemies that I talked about in the beginning: the rejection, the lack of appreciation, the neglect, and all that stuff. But there's also this other aspect that, okay, so you choose to say yes to sex, you choose to move into the bedroom and to have some, physical contact, so that you allow your body to respond to that pleasure, not necessarily to the anticipation of pleasure. But what happens if you don't actually enjoy that? Because sometimes, like I put it here, you go to the party and it sucks. You're not having a good time, because what is happening there, you don't have the connection with the people. The communication that you have is not working. You haven't actually created this connection with the people around you. Well, in this case, it's obviously all the things, all the barriers that we put between us and our partner, all these emotional blocks that create lack of intimacy. So if for many years you felt rejected when you've asked for sex or when you've hinted at sex, if your partner criticizes your body, or they tell you, why are you eating all that stuff, you're getting fat, or if you never shown appreciation, if they don't speak your love language, you can check my workshop from last week on love languages. If you feel neglected in the relationship, if you feel unimportant, all of these things are literally another brick in the wall that you're creating between you and your partner, which means that even if you want to respond to pleasure and your body could react positively to cuddles, to kisses, you're not going to get there, because you're not going to say yes to cuddles and kisses with someone who constantly doesn't appreciate you, who rejects you every time, who's never in the mood, who has a headache. So in order to say yes to sex, you also need to work on all these different the bricks in the wall that we create in our lives. So of course, it is a bit of a catch-22. Like I said, you need to create emotional intimacy to get physical intimacy. And then by having physical intimacy, you break down the wall, which facilitates a deeper emotional connection. And this is something that obviously takes time and takes communication and takes both parties making a conscious decision to work on the relationship, this commitment that I mentioned in the beginning, and a decision that you both make to start trying. So I'm going to open up to questions, but I want to leave you with this quote from Marcel Proust, which is one of my favorite ways of looking at relationships, and why I tell a lot of my clients that essentially every relationship is salvageable if both parties are willing to take a different perspective. So Marcel Proust said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, which means leaving the relationship, divorcing, or trying to find someone else to fulfill your needs, but in having new eyes. So actually exploring different ways of connecting with each other, learning each other's love language, shifting your perspective from this point of view of rejection, contempt, and lack of intimacy into a space where you can create a new relationship. So here I am, I'm done with this. If you guys, anybody on the line has any questions, you can unmute yourself and pop on the screen, or you can put your questions in the chat, whatever works for you. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have about this or any other topics for that matter. But obviously, if we keep it on the topic, it'll be better. Has anybody got anything to find out about? I'm just going to stop sharing and put my face back on the screen so I can see you guys. Anybody? Well, if not, because everybody seems to, that don't mean that I've explained everything perfectly, or that none of you really understands exactly what I meant. So I'm hoping it's the former rather than the latter. So thank you so much, Polly. Thank you so much, everyone.
Sorry.
Sure.
Hi. This was great, and happy I finally made it.
Good.
Been
Thank
wanting
you.
to do that for the last 2 weekends, but this couldn't have been better timed, actually, honestly, because I was just busy, like I said, when I logged on, I was still seeing my son off, and the other one's gone on a play date. So we literally have the house to ourselves right now. And then you started talking about whatever needs to be done, and then I went inside. I lit a candle, put on some aromatherapy out here, and I'm just setting the mood. So thank you for that, for motivating me.
Lovely.
Something
That's
like
great.
that. And I'm trying to talk in whispers, so I'm not being heard, which is why I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, but
thank you for being.
thanks. Sure, thanks for that motivation. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so I'm going to respond to private comments separately. There's no point putting them here. But yeah, if you guys have any questions at all, like I mentioned, I post all these videos in my private Facebook group. So if any of you wants to join the group, all of this stuff and all the previous webinars that I've done are there. I also do every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Hong Kong time. I do an open relationship clinic, which is also a webinar where anyone can join, and either we can have a conversation about any relationship issues or questions that you have, or it can be more of a private conversation, or you can also send questions that I will respond to, but anonymously. I don't need to mention your name. So I'm doing this because I know, people have a lot of questions in these particular times. There's so much going on. And if you want, that is basically another free webinar that I'm offering. So if at any time you want to explore this or anything else, obviously I'm in the group, so you can find my number and you can watch all these videos on my Facebook page. So thank you, ladies. I will save this chat and reply privately to the comments that were made privately to me. Thank you so much once again for joining. I really appreciate you, ladies, and I look forward to actually being able to join your next talk, Maru. Thank you so much for putting that together. Polly, did you want to say something?
No, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, ladies. Have a beautiful Friday night and see you soon.